Helldivers 2 keeps getting better and better, and each update that they bring to us always seems to improve the game a decent amount between balances to addition of new weapons or enemies. The newest update, patch 1.2 in particular, provides quite a bit of content for us Helldivers. I'm going to run through this patch note 1.2 and show you guys the largest updates and changes to different weapon stratagems and also different quality of life changes they added in this update. They added quite a bit of content to this update, but starting off, they added 2 new planetary hazard additions. This includes the blizzards and sandstorms. Both of these new planetary hazard additions act very similar. They are both going to slow down your Helldiver, and they are also going to reduce the visibility on what particular planet you're on. Blizzards are going to be found on your icier planets, and your sandstorms are going to be found on those desert-like environments. I was able to witness a sandstorm on one of the planets, and the sandstorm does interrupt your gameplay quite a bit. It reduces your visibility where you can only see just a few feet, and then your character is dramatically slowed. But in terms of the visibility, they also added that your visibility is reduced, but also the enemy's visibility is reduced, making it a little bit harder for the enemies to find you and take you out. There were no planets with blizzards by the time they released this update, so I do not have footage of that, but I would assume it's going to be rather similar to, if not the same as the sandstorms, just in a snowy, cold environment. Now, one of the best quality of life changes they just added to this update is the increased level cap from 50 to 150. Now, this doesn't affect us too much, as most of us know by now that once you reach level 20, you're able to unlock every stratagem that you need to get. However, one thing that you can get from continuing to level up to 50 is titles. And in these new levels from 50 to 150, you are going to be able to obtain different titles. It is unclear on what every single title is right now, but I would assume you're going to have some pretty fun and creative titles to show to other players on your player card. Now, to quickly run through the missions that they updated the Retrieve Essential Personnel mission. This change is going to move the enemy spawn points a little further away to help you out with completing this mission, as well as it's going to take now fewer civilians to complete the mission, which this is a good change to this mission. It was always one of the more challenging ones, which is not a bad thing, but it just seemed unbalanced compared to some of the other missions that you could pick from. The Destroy Command Bunkers mission now has more objectives that have to be destroyed, as well as you can find this mission on difficulty 5. And for the operation modifiers, the one that they changed here is just having the time of the increased stratagem cooldown that would be applied to certain planets. So this should be a pretty good change, where it seemed like the time was definitely a lot more than it probably should have been in the first place. Now let's dive into the primary, secondary, and support weapons changes that they made in this update. There are some balance changes that are rather insignificant, so I will mainly focus on the ones that are going to affect gameplay, where you might think of taking in a new weapon based off the buff or nerf that they received. The arc thrower, being one of the more reliable and go-to weapons for Helldivers, got a slight nerf. The effective range dropped from 50 meters to 35 meters. This is not a dramatic change, but you may have to think a little bit differently about just shooting this out in the distance and hope that it kills Terminids or automatons, but this will still be a highly effective weapon, and this nerf is not going to affect the weapon that much. A rather nice change to see is for the guard dog. Now, when you run out of ammo with the guard dog, you generally have to wait a few seconds to refill the ammo in it, and then it will continue to work for you. But now you can refill the guard dog by simply just picking up a supply box, and then the guard dog will be reloaded and immediately start helping you out. The guard dog is definitely one of the more popular support weapons to bring, but with this buff that it got, hopefully it will encourage more players to use it. Now, another support weapon that got a buff is the anti-material rifle. The damage increased by 30%, which this was definitely a needed buff for the weapon. It was never a bad choice. It always did decent damage, but it always felt like it was getting outperformed by some of the other support weapons like the railgun. Now, I can't remember how many shots in particular it would have taken to take down a Hulk with the anti-material rifle, but after testing it out, it definitely seemed like it would be a pretty viable option to bring with you, especially against the automaton. Mainly one, because it does have a scope. If you do want to take down the Hulks, you can scope in and then have a clear sight at their weak spot on their eye on the front of them. and it took about, say, 3 to 4 shots to take him out, which that is not bad at all considering the amount of ammo that you can have with this. The usefulness of the anti-material rifle kind of reminds me of how they approached the flamethrower. The flamethrower was never a really great stratagem to bring with you into a mission. It wasn't awful, but there was definitely better choices to pick. But when they ended up buffing the flamethrower, they increased the damage, making it a lot more useful for any enemy that you end up facing. And seems to be the same case with the anti-material rifle. With that increase of 30% to the damage, it definitely makes taking down some of those larger opponents, as well as just making it maybe a better overall weapon. It'll be curious to see how many players end up using this after the patch, when there are other options that may be better for overall missions. Now, the only real primary weapon really worth talking about in this balance update is going to be the Dominator. The Dominator got a pretty massive boost to its damage, going from 200 to 300, while also having increased stagger. And after seeing this 50% boost to the damage of the Dominator, I wanted to give it a shot, and after playing around with it for a while, it was pretty apparent to me that this weapon is going to be one that you're going to see a lot of Helldivers take into certain missions and operations. It had a similar feel to the Plasma Scorcher, and the Plasma Scorcher is probably the best primary weapon that is in the game right now. It does excellent damage against all enemies, and it has those explosive rounds, so it is beneficial to use against Terminids, but also the automatons. The only place that it really struggles right now is going to be still breaking through armor, but also just the overall stability while shooting the weapon. I mean, it's kind of all over the place, so I would say it's more of a skilled weapon. If you can hit your shots, you're going to be rewarded, but if you're just spraying this weapon, you're going to be all over the place, you're going to be missing a lot of shots, and it's probably going to be a little more difficult to use, but if you have that aim, it will reward you. With all that being said, the Dominator is still probably going to be considered maybe a top 3 to top 5 best primary to use currently in Helldivers 2. Now for a couple other notable changes to some of the weapons. For the recoilless rifle, they increased the number of rockets you restore from the supply box from 2 to 3. This is just a good overall change to make for the recoilless rifle. And then for the spear, they did something very similar. They increased the number of missiles you restore from supply boxes from 1 to 2, which this was definitely necessary for the spear. The spear is already pretty underwhelming when using it, so they can at least change it up a little bit for it's a little more enjoyable and you have a little bit more ammo to play around with the spear. For the other primary weapons that they updated in this patch notes, like the Breaker Incendiary, the Liberator Penetrator, the Diligence Counter Sniper, as well as the Slugger, the changes are not that significant. I did try a handful of these and it does not seem to affect them too much. In particular, the Diligence Counter Sniper, I mean, this weapon has been pretty bad from the get-go, and all the change was increasing armor penetration from light to medium, and I did not see really a change where it's going to make me want to bring this into my next mission or operation. So hopefully they will do something in the future to make this a more viable weapon and more fun weapon in general to bring into missions. Now for some of the bigger changes that they made to the automaton and terminids. The biggest change here that I like to see was the change in damage, the reduction of damage to Bile Spewer and Nursing Spewer Puke. I felt like this is something I noticed from when the game first came out, because when a spewer was on you, the spewer is not an intimidating enemy, but if you happen to be stopped for a second, it felt like that puke when it was spit on you would just instant kill you. When I felt like there was also should have been a little bit more forgiveness, just because the type of enemy you're facing, it's not like you're facing a Bile Titan or anything. You should have a chance to get away, so I think this is a good quality of life change for this particular enemy. Now another change was to the Bile Titans. The Bile Titans can no longer be stunned using a stun grenade. I saw this part of the patch note and I was definitely a little disappointed, but also not too mad about it in the same part, because I was someone who did use this tactic of stunning a Bile Titan and then firing a particular weapon at him to take him down, or tossing a stratagem on him to kill them. But I think this is overall a fine change. I don't think it's going to really make them too much tougher. Bile Titans as they stand right now are not as intimidating as they look, and they are actually rather easy to take down as long as you're not getting swarmed by 10 of them or so. The last note for enemy changes are for the Shriekers. Shriekers, when they first came out, say if you shot one and then it fell on your body, you almost always instantly died. But With this change now, you take significantly less damage, and hopefully this will prevent you from dying from any more Shriekers, or at least just take less damage. Now there are some more patch notes in this update, but the last thing I'm going to talk about is going to be the adjustment to armor. They stated that if you're wearing heavy armor, you take 10% less damage than if you were wearing light armor. And then if you're wearing medium armor, you take 5% less damage than if you were wearing light armor as well. Now after seeing this, I did try other armors like heavy, medium, and light armor to see if I could see an actual change in the amount of damage I take from certain enemies. However, I was rather disappointed after testing these armors, the heavy armor in particular, because the heavy armor is the worst armor comparing it to the light and medium armor, mainly for the reason of your speed of your Helldiver as well as your stamina regen. And I believe being able to run a little bit longer and faster actually in turn prevents you from taking more damage. So I think this is more beneficial than just having armor that can take a few more shots. But the overall change to armor doesn't seem to really significantly change how it was prior to the update. I think an update to the armor passives on certain armors would be more beneficial than trying to play around with the amount of damage you can take with a particular armor piece. Now, a couple other changes that they did not mention in the patch notes are the addition of 2 more enemies to the automaton. These enemies include the gunship and the factory strider. Gunships are pretty similar to dropships because they have 4 engines still. They are not as beefy as dropships where you can shoot them down a bit easier. However, the gunships are able to track your location. They have a detector on the front of the gunship, and once they see your location, they will fire shots at you until you take them down, and the shots that they fire are pretty powerful, so you do not want to stand in the middle of the open while these are getting fired at you because you will die. Now, the factory strider is a very intimidating enemy. It can be found very rarely, but it does seem to pop up here and there on those higher difficulties. It's kind of a cross between a tank and a strider, but definitely a bit more beefier than the tank, and it seems like the weak spot on these are going to be the legs, so use your stratagems and some of your weapons to take out the legs, and you shouldn't have an issue taking these out. But these are the biggest and probably the strongest enemy currently in Helldivers 2. Well, that is all I wanted to talk about in this update 1.2 for Helldivers 2. Feel free to leave a comment down below on what your favorite change was. And if you did like this video, feel free to smash that like button and subscribe button. And we'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.